Want to welcome everybody to Northwest Indiana Green Drinks. And we've been very excited because this is our 13th year to be gathering and offering such amazingly, awesomely, wonderfully, fantastic, excitedly presentations. And tonight I'm especially excited that Brian Forist agreed to be with us tonight. And want to make an announcement right now, and hopefully I'll remember at the end. July is our break month, so we won't be meeting, but then we'll be back again in August, and we'll have August, September, October, November, and then December we take a break again for the holidays. So just to give you a little heads up about that. Let me see if there was anything else. I don't know. I think Save the Dunes staff is pretty exhausted at this point because they just had a week that had maybe 3, 4, 5 major events that I was counting. But and thanks for being with us this evening. I know that you're trying to get some vacay stuck in and recovery time. So Em's going to go ahead and give us a breakdown of housekeeping items, so we're all on the same page and we know what to expect out of this evening.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. A couple of housekeeping notes is that we ask that the meeting is being recorded. So at the end of the evening, all recordings will go up to Save the Dunes YouTube page, and all previous Green Drink recordings live there as well if you've missed past presentations. So this meeting is being recorded. We ask that everyone stays on mute the duration of the presentation, and leave any comments in the chat here on Zoom. And for those watching on Facebook Live, any comments or questions can be dropped in the comment section of Facebook, and we will get to those questions at the end as well. And yeah, those are my housekeeping notes.
Thank you, Em. You're
Of
doing that
course.
faster and faster every time. And then I'm always worried you've skipped over something,
If you
but I
guys
don't think you have. So anyhow, we're so glad to have with us this evening Brian Forist. And Em and I both were so fortunate to be able to actually see in person Brian present this topic last year during Pride Month in Michigan City. And one of the city council persons, Greg Coulter, actually set up a session for elected officials. So that was really special. And right after that, Em and I said, okay, we're going to book Brian. And we booked him right away after that. So this has been planned for a year now, actually. So Brian, a lot of people know him from having been the past let's see, he was the past education director at the Indiana Dunes Environmental Learning Center. And currently he is a park ranger for interpretation at the Keweenaw National Historical Park way up in northern Michigan. And he also is a senior lecturer and program coordinator at Indiana University. And if Brian wants to tell you anything else about himself, I'll let him do that. And Brian, we're going to turn it over to you and we'll see if the screen share goes as smoothly as it did
Great.
during our practice run.
Great. Well, I've spent a lot of time on Zoom in the last many years, and so I've gotten fairly used to it. Welcome, folks. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Nancy and Em. It's nice to see that my sister is here, and my husband is here, and my good friend Kelly is here, and my friends Liam and Brian are here, and the Pavlovics. I don't know you well, but I admire you. And Noel, someday I want to just like go walk in the woods and learn every plant you know. Uh, so I'm happy to be here. And as Nancy said, I kind of have two jobs right now. I am on the faculty at Indiana University in a program called Parks, Recreation, and the Outdoors. So I get to hang out with primarily young students. I like to think that I'm helping to raise the next generation of park and protected area professionals. And it's a real privilege to learn alongside them. Uh, and I'm having a really great summer because I'm spending the entire summer and I think what is my favorite place in the world, and that's up on the Keweenaw Peninsula in Upper Michigan. So, you know, we're down here in Indiana, right? But if Michigan is the mitten and then this part up here, I'm up on this thumb that sticks into Lake Superior. Working at Keweenaw National Historical Park as a seasonal ranger. And Keweenaw is a park that tells the story of hard rock copper mining in Upper Michigan that dates back several thousand years by indigenous folks, and then from about 1840 on by colonizers. And it's fascinating. And I love this area. I think of it as being in the peaceful, quiet North Woods. And what I'm learning as I'm spending time really thinking about the copper industry, that peace and quiet we experience here today really belies what other people experienced when the copper was being extracted, and just the mechanical noises and the numbers of people that in the little pretty sleepy town of Calumet, where our park is headquartered, at the turn of the last century, there were 40,000 people speaking 30 different languages, and now there's 1,000 or so people. So it's wonderful, and it's great to be back in the green and gray. This is a really weird time for our national parks, and I feel really proud to be working as a seasonal ranger. We're under an executive order to not curtail any services for the public. And my feeling is that as seasonal, I have that capacity to help protect the place, to serve the visitors, and as I think parks have always done, no matter what others have to say, steward the American taxpayers' money very, very prudently and wisely. And so I'm really happy to be a park ranger and have a break from Indiana University. What I've been asked to talk about tonight is some work that I've been involved in the last several years. When I moved to Michigan City in 2005, I immediately gravitated towards the old Lighthouse Museum. And for a handful of years, Warren and I were both docents there. And I remember really well the day we went on a tour and told the folks there that we would like to be docents. And their response was, "Oh my goodness, you can go to the second floor," because we were so young and spry. But I was a docent for a number of years at the old Lighthouse Museum in Michigan City. And in this academic world that I have a foot in, I also have been involved in doing some research and historical research, which is not my first love, I guess, or something I'm particularly trained in, but I think I've got a pretty good handle on how to do it. And so what I'm going to do tonight is share with you, and I will share my screen. I've got a few pictures, not a whole lot, but a few, a talk that I am calling something about these two useful lives, celebrating the love of Ann and Tat. And at the heart of this story is this woman you see in this picture, Harriet Colfax. And for 43 years, she was the lighthouse keeper in Michigan City, Indiana. And I believe she still holds the record as the longest serving lighthouse keeper in the service. And she was a pretty amazing woman. And the entire time, the 43 years that she was at the light station in Michigan City, uh, she lived there with her companion, Ann Hartwell. And so I'll tell their story a little bit as I get going. But let me just sort of set the stage that the Michigan City Old Lighthouse Museum and Michigan City and the lighthouse that is there sits on land that has been used by the Miami, Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Kaskaskia, and Peoria people. My understanding, the knowledge I have is primarily Potawatomi and some Miami use as well. And for a long time, folks would travel through the area, generally residing somewhat further south, but would use what we now call the Indiana Dunes area as seasonal hunting and fishing camps, perhaps maple sugaring camps, and then they would reside further down in the Kankakee area. A newspaper from 1902 noted that some Miami Indians were present when the town was first platted in 1832. And that was from the Indianapolis News of 1902. The land where the Michigan City Lighthouse now sits was acquired by the U.S. government in 1826 through a treaty with the Potawatomi. The Treaty of Chicago in 1833 set the stage for their removal. And the removal began in 1838, though, thank goodness, there were a number of families, part of the Pokagon Band, that were able to stay in what is now Indiana. And over the years, I've become quite close friends with one person from the Pokagon Band who has taught me a great deal. So I just wanted to acknowledge that this land has changed over the years. So Michigan City, as I'm sure probably all of you know, sits along that little shoreline of Lake Michigan in the state of Indiana, about 40 miles of shoreline in the northwest corner of the state. And Michigan City has been important from its inception in commerce, and it was a port on Lake Michigan. And there's stories that it was competing to become the prominent port with a small city to the north and west called Chicago. And Chicago got the deal, and Michigan City remained important, but didn't have the cachet that bigger city did. But what we're going to look at here is this 1869 bird's eye view of the Indiana Dunes as you travel north or travel up to the west along the shore. You see Trail Creek, the creek that flows into Lake Michigan. And the lighthouse was at what was called the bend in Trail Creek. So this right angle bend just before the creek flows into the lake is where the lighthouse in question stood. The first, this lighthouse that we now talk about was the second light in Michigan City. The first was built in 1837, and it operated for 21 years. But it wasn't sufficient for the emerging importance of this lumber and grain port on the south end of Lake Michigan. And so in 1858, the structure you see in this old postcard was built. And a person named John M. Clarkson was the first light keeper. He was the last keeper of the 1837 light and became the first keeper of the 1858 light. And then in 1861, Harriet Colfax took the job. So how did she get the job? You know, there were a number of women light keepers. That was not out of the question. But most of the women light keepers got the job because either their husband or their father often died in service and they knew the job and they took over. But Harriet was an interesting case. She got the job as a political appointee. And turns out that, oh, that's the wrong picture. I don't know if I got the right picture. There we go. Her cousin, this fellow named Schuyler Colfax, who was a congressperson at the time in 1861, she approached him. She had been teaching music and singing, teaching piano and voice. And the story goes that she wanted a job that was a little bit easier than teaching and thought maybe he could set her up with a patronage job. And indeed he did. So he was able to get her hired as a political appointee under President Abraham Lincoln. And what is unusual is that as a political appointee, she also had longevity and stayed through many administrations for the full 43 years. So I've been interested in this story, and there's very little information about Harriet available. There's virtually nothing that she wrote, with two exceptions: her will and testimony, and her logbooks for the years that she was the lighthouse keeper. And her logbooks are really quite interesting. And I'll get there in just a minute, but let me share with you a little bit of her past. So here's a piece from the Iowa County Democrat of 1895, a newspaper article written about her. And it said, at the time of her appointment, Miss Colfax was a pleasant-faced young woman of 25, and her petite figure seemed peculiarly unfitted for the position. The article then goes on to say, time has disproven any supposition, and the verdict is now unanimous that a wiser choice could not have been made. So while there was great skepticism at first, one newspaper article from the Morning Courier and Journal from New Haven, Connecticut in 1891 said that when Miss Colfax received her appointment through her cousin Schuyler Colfax, sneering critics hinted that if a wax doll had friends at court, it might as well be chosen lightkeeper as this pretty girl. But Harriet's logbooks and the accolades that she received definitely speak differently. So here is from another newspaper article from 1890 that describes one particular event. Said one stormy night, after making her way with difficulty along the raised walk over which the waves dashed incessantly, and with freezing spray wetting her garments to the skin, the little keeper found that the lock had been tampered with and refused to yield to her efforts. Nothing daunted, she dashed out a window and climbed through the aperture, only to find that in her delay, the oil, and this was probably lard oil she was carrying at the time, the oil had congealed and the wick would not ignite. But the beacon must be lighted, and once more the perilous path was followed through the icy shower, and though she slipped and fell, and rose only to stumble again, she at length reached the house, the lighthouse, in safety. This was lighting a pierhead light. Reached the house in safety, heated her oil, and retraced her steps, that the morning signal might not fail the watching sailors who trembled for the safety of the keeper as the light greeted them. Strong men said afterward that no reward would have tempted them to trim the beacon that night. And so we hear these stories pretty frequently during her lifetime of her heroics, if you will, or sheroics, if you will, and the kind of uh, diligent attention she gave to the job, regardless of the conditions. In one of her logbooks, she wrote, severe northerly gale from midnight throughout the day with rain and snow. Colder. The steamer H.A. Tuttle was wrecked at the entrance of the harbor, being driven by a huge wave onto the west pier when her rudder was broken and the boat rendered helpless. She grounded at the end of the pier and was soon broken in two by the force of the sea, and now partially blocks the harbor, a total wreck. The crew of 13 men and one woman were rescued through the brave efforts of the life-saving crew. And so she was referring to the workers at the life-saving station, which is where Michigan City's Coast Guard station now sits. I've been told by, I'm not going to remember his name right now, but the former captain of the lighthouse or the Coast Guard station there, that there are some timbers from the original life-saving station within the existing Coast Guard building. Harriet wrote other things in her logbooks. On May 6th, 1882, she wrote, warm rains, painted the lantern stairs and upper hall, two arrivals. Most of her entries were pretty mundane, ships coming and going. On July 10th, 1883, warm and clear, varnished the woodwork. October 2nd, 1873, received check from Commander Murray, for $32,000 for wood for the lighthouse, one arrival. On August 19th, 1879, received letter from the inspector authorizing me to purchase 4 cords of wood. So most of what we have in her own writing is just these records of comings and goings. On several occasions, though, she wrote of seeing displays of the Northern Lights, and she wrote about her garden and efforts to improve the light station. May 2nd, 1877, her log reads, hard frost, many gardens injured. Very brilliant Northern Lights tonight. On April 5th, 1889, snow, light northeast wind, mild. Inspector called, set out 2 large trees in yard, basswood and elm. On January 1st, 1888, she wrote, a bright, beautiful beginning of the new year. We also get just a glimpse of her humor, and it's only once, but she said that sometimes she would go out that pier headlight and almost die. But that seemed more matter of fact. But on August 16th, 1872, she wrote, this is the day on which the comet was to strike the earth and demolish all things terrestrial, but failed to come up to appointment. The elevated walk was run into by a vessel entering the harbor and considerably damaged for arrivals in port. So we don't have a whole lot about Harriet, but what I have been able to find is there were a lot of newspaper articles written about her, and I have not found a single newspaper article written about Harriet that didn't also talk about Ann Hartwell. Miss Colfax, and this is from the Cincinnati Enquirer in 1894. Miss Colfax is a native of Ogdensburg, New York, but she has migrated to Michigan in 1853. It's fair to say that she is a Western woman. She learned to set type in her brother's printing office. Subsequently, she taught music and formed a sort of life partnership with her lifelong friend and companion, Miss Ann Hartwell, at the time a cheery little schoolma'am of Michigan City. For upward of 30 years, these little women have dwelt together in perfect harmony, their intercourse being unmarred by a single cross word. That description from 1894, so 30 some years after Harriet took the position, is really typical of every article written during their lifetime. Here's another from the Chicago Tribune, October 2nd, 1904, published just before Harriet's retirement. In the house of Miss Colfax, her confidant and companion of 70 years, lives Miss Ann Hartwell, a tiny, slim, blue-eyed woman with curly gray hair, infinitely gentle, and like her aged comrade in many ways. Passing the 80 milestones together, these 2 quaint, lovable spinsters have been bosom friends since the days of their childhood in Ogdensburg, New York. Miss Hartwell was a pioneer school teacher of northern Indiana. She taught 3 generations of its people, and when old age and failing health brought an end to her work, she went to the lighthouse to pass away her final years with Harriet. Here they lived for many years, clinging to the old-fashioned habits and methods of half a century ago. So this theme that keeps coming up is this dedicated, long-term friendship. They had been childhood friends. One newspaper article that actually, I think it's the one that Greg Coulter, now on the city council, found, has the headline, Old Maids Plan to Heal Their Hearts. School teacher and lighthouse keeper have tried it for half a century. And that was an article from 1902, also in the Chicago Tribune. And here's what the article said. Both disappointed in love affairs, 2 women plighted their lives to each other and sealed the compact by exchanging engagement rings, which have been so worn for nearly half a century. that is the extent of what I've been able to locate during their lives about any previous relationships that they had. And it sounds that they each may have been engaged to a man. One may have died. There's sort of conflicting stories. We don't know what happened to the other, if he died as well. But it was at that point that they committed themselves to each other. And that's when they exchanged those rings that they wore the rest of their lifetime. And throughout their lifetime, we again hear more and more of this deeply committed, loving relationship. We don't know the nature of that relationship, except that it was, I would argue, deeply loving and committed. And I'll get into some of that in a bit, but here's some more from this 1904 article. Winter and summer on Sunday mornings, these two slow-going, weary but dainty ladies can be seen wending away to church, arm in arm, dressed like the fashion plates of the antebellum days, smiling upon middle-aged men and women who were their pupils 40 years or more ago, cheering one another with gossip of the romances of the far time when they were themselves belles of the same town in which they are now ending their peaceful lives. There is something almost childlike in the tenderness with which these two cronies love one another. We have never quarreled, Harriet and I, Miss Ann will say. And we never will, Ann, Miss Colfax will answer, taking the other's small, thin hand in hers. Never, that is, unless you again insist on tending my light. That's one thing you or anyone else shall never do while I am lighthouse keeper. And then the queer, guileless pair will laugh right heartily, smiling in each other's faces as though it were a merry topic. And so that's a real consistent story we hear. Well, I think of the two of them as, in contemporary terms, as a couple. Uh, Clearly, they were in this lovely, loving, committed relationship. The news seems to change after they died. Anne died first on January 22nd of 1905, and this was mere months after Harriet retired as lighthouse keeper. Harriet died a few months later on April 16th. And after their passing, the story is told differently. So here's a 1935 article. As the story runs, Miss Harriet E. Colfax secured the position from her first cousin, Schuyler Colfax, a vice president during the time of Ulysses S. Grant. Disappointed in love, she turned to her cousin to send her far away so that she might forget. And this is new. There's no record. Well, first off, she lived in Michigan City before taking the lighthouse, so she wasn't sent far away. And when you think about the Michigan City lighthouse, it was not far away. In the early days, they would have to walk over to 2nd Street, over near where the casino is, to get across Trail Creek. And eventually, what we know is the drawbridge today was built. I've heard story that I don't have any documentation is that Harriet opposed the construction of the drawbridge because she liked her peace and quiet. But this is now we're saying that she was so despondent, being disappointed in love, that she seeks out this job, being sent far away so she can forget. And that really wasn't the case at all. The 1935 statement, where that newspaper article in the Michigan City paper said disappointed in love, which was the phrase that was used in 1902. But now it's being quoted. And about every decade or so, an article comes out about Harriet that talks about Anne, and it builds on this disappointed in love story. Here's one from 1950. Also in the Michigan City paper. She was reported to have been, quote, disappointed in love and took the lonely job of keeper, much as another girl might enter a convent in similar circumstances. And so the story is taking on this new quality that I have found no basis in any original documents. That exact same statement comes up again in 1965. And one article from 1979 that I would argue is part of this process of trying to disappear Anne. It simply says, in the time of Harriet Colfax, the assistant keeper was a former Michigan City school teacher, Ann Hartwell. And so now she's gone from lifelong friend, bosom friend, companion to assistant. And so she is no longer that dear companion, but simply a helper. Well, the lighthouse is abandoned after the Second World War. In 1963, it is sold to the city of Michigan City. And in 1965, the Michigan City Historical Society takes over and begins a years-long process of renovating the abandoned structure to create a museum. So it's had to be repaired. A lot of work was done, and the museum has now been operating for 50 some years. Here's an interesting thing, though, and this is from 1969. There was a record in the minutes of the Michigan City Historical Society, and the record simply said Harriet Colfax never had a gravestone. And so the Michigan City Historical Society took it upon themselves to create a gravestone. And this is what I call the commemorative stone that was put in place in Greenwood Cemetery in 1969. And I think this may be one of the greatest acts of distancing Harriet from Anne. If you go about 15 yards from that commemorative stone, you'll see these two stones. The one on the left says Anne, the one on the right says Harriet. I've had conversations with people, a former director of the Michigan City Lighthouse Museum. When I showed them these pictures, the response was, that's a different Harriet. And so I wanted to know, was it Harriet Van Pelt you're thinking about, who was one of Anne's nieces? An interesting side story. The niece's mother had died in a fireworks accident on the 4th of July in 1864. And the next spring, their father, the two girls, they lived in the lighthouse for a while, by the way, with Harriet and Ann. The next spring, their father, to get them their mind off of the loss of their mother, sent them on a trip to Washington, D.C., where one fateful night they were in the audience to see a play called Our American Cousin, and they were witnesses to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. But Harriet Van Pelt is buried just a few yards away with her full name on the stone. A little bit of further research shows that, this is the distance, the commemorative stone, and then just a few yards away are Harriet and Ann's gravestones. And if you look at the cemetery records, you'll see that Harriet Hattie Sherman Simpson is in one location, but Ann C. Hartwell and Harriet A. Colfax are in Section C, Lot 4, Block 6, and I've got to move my screen, plots 7 and 8. And I am certain that those two women are buried side by side. Well, in 2017, I, who have a hard time leaving well enough alone, made this post on the Michigan City Old Lighthouse Museum Facebook page that I was running at the time. And so there's often confusion regarding the final resting place of lighthouse keeper Harriet Colfax and her lifelong companion Ann Hartwell. And I go on to say that there is this commemorative stone, and then there are the actual graves of, I said, our sheroes in the Hartwell Colfax lot, as stated in the Michigan City Dispatch at the time of their interment, that they were buried in the same lot. And well, this wasn't a popular thing to state, and I was asked to leave the Lighthouse Museum. Things have changed, and I think one day I might be welcome again. But I think there was an active disappearing of the relationship between Harriet and Anne. Not too long ago, this wonderful book for children called Miss Colfax's Light was written. And there was consultation with the Michigan City Historical Society. At the end of the book, after the story, which is lovely and talks about Anne, at the end, though, they talk about consultation with the Historical Society. And in the commentary at the end of the book, they state that they are buried near each other. And I believe that was the official line, that they are buried near each other. And my interpretation is this, that near each other and side by side are very, very different. And I am certain from a number of records, interment records, cemetery records, wills, that they indeed are buried with those two simple stones side by side. Why does any of this matter? Well, I've been really influenced by an academic named Margaret Middleton. And in 2020, she wrote an article called Queer Possibility. And in that, she starts by saying, as queer people, we're used to approaching museum visits as if we are archaeologists, seeking long-lost traces of our ancestors. Finding our stories often requires that we read between the proverbial lines. And that's something I have tried to do in studying Harriet and Ann. And so in that study, I think I can offer two truths. And I'm really skeptical of truth. That's something I guess I've learned as an academic and maybe growing up with a scientist for a father. Truth is elusive and is always changing. But I think I can offer two truths regarding Harriet and Ann. One is, we don't know they were lesbians. We don't know. But here's the other truth. We don't know they weren't. And that I believe to be a very important distinction. Another scholar who I am a real fan of, and one who I've gotten to know over the years, named Susan Ferentinos, has written, there is a powerful experience museums can offer by restoring visibility to a group of people who have been consistently marginalized or erased in the larger culture. Middleton talks about the default at historic sites. If we don't know about a relationship, we assume the heteronormative. And in this idea of queer possibility, she encourages us to imagine the possibility, use a creative imagination, read between the lines. And Susan says that that is a way to open up our museums and historic sites to a broader audience, something that is very much being challenged right now in the United States. And I can say this because I'm not saying this as an employee of the National Park Service, but the 47th President of the United States issued one executive order declaring that there are two genders in the United States, and immediately, almost immediately after that, disappeared trans people from the Stonewall National Monument website, a site of the Stonewall riots in 1969 that was primarily promulgated by trans women of color. There's another executive order by the 47th President of the United States, and this is about restoring truth and sanity to American history, and talks about historic sites. It particularly talks about Independence National Historical Park and the Smithsonian, but says that they must only tell stories essentially of American exceptionalism and American victory. And just the recent news that the Secretary of Defense has ordered the naval vessel named for Harvey Milk to be changed, speaks to this disdain for queer possibility, or in the case of Harvey Milk, queer reality. And so maybe this now falls into the hands of small venues to represent and elevate. Well, let me just share a couple of final things here. I think I will stop my screen share because I need to find a document that I've got on my desktop. Let me read you a little bit from a news article that was published right after Harriet passed away. And it was first published in the St. Louis Republic, St. Louis, Missouri, and then in the Jackson, Mississippi Daily News on April 30th and May 3rd, 1905, respectively. The title was Very Long Career This Woman Spends Lifetime in Lighthouse, 43 years the time. Passing of Miss Harriet Colfax recalls her world record for continuous service. She remained loyal to childhood romance. And this article appears to be written by someone who visited Harriet after Anne passed away and just before Harriet died. And here's what the author wrote. Miss Colfax mourned the loss of her lifelong companion. And the death of Miss Hartwell undoubtedly hastened the end of the faithful little woman. In her apartments, she grieved for her departed friend, and on the night she died, her thoughts were with the one who became dearer to her than any other person, the one who represented to her all that she had known in her mature years of home life and family ties. Why, Anne is here in this room, Miss Colfax would say. Then, as she would realize the fallacy of her statement, she would cry aloud for her beloved companion. "Oh, darling, I miss you so," were almost the last words the little keeper of the light uttered before her own beacon light, which had burned brightly for so many years, went out, and her soul became a passenger in charge of invisible mariners and sailed away to join the companion who was keeping the harbor light of heaven burning for her. One article referred to their story as the story of two useful lives. I maintain that their usefulness continues today and provides a model for similarly loving and deep companionable relationships. In the article that began with this idea of a plan to heal their hearts, school teacher and lighthouse keeper have tried for half a century. At the end of that article, there was a poem called Since First You Looked. And I cannot imagine that an editor or a writer said this poem goes well with this story. Since first you looked upon me and looked my heart away, my thoughts have never rested for longing night and day. As homing swallows flutter o'er woodland, lake, and lea, they soar and fly forever, to thee, alone to thee. And though the mountains were golden, and though the rivers ran wide, I'd pass them all by unbeholden, beloved, to make you mine. And I think that describes this beautiful relationship between Harriet Colfax and Ann Hartwell. and indeed 2 very useful lives. So thanks, folks. I'm happy to address any questions or comments y'all have.
Thank you, Brian. There are a couple of comments or questions here in the chat on Zoom. Monica did make one comment that said the articles seem to assume a lot, like using spinsters, for example, to, you know, just make assumptions about people or use that
Yeah.
language. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think some of that is the language of the day. As I think was maybe what was being written in 1935 and 1969. But I do see this really dramatic change in how it's presented. So yes, it was not uncommon, it was not unheard of for women companions to live together, particularly in this sort of late Victorian period. There's even a term called a Boston marriage, which was a relationship of some intimacy between women. So it's not out of the question. And those may be more dignified than the terms like spinsters and that they had been the belles of the ball early, and now they were just these little old women living together. But I really think there was more that we can read sort of between the lines and contextualizing that kind of language, if that helps.
And then there's also, did you make any mention of any of their obituaries or what their obituaries said?
I didn't hear, but I do have them, and you know, Harriet's obituary was far and wide. It was in the New York Times, and every obituary I have found has mentioned Anne and no other lost love. An interesting thing, there was one particular obituary that must have been, the 1905 version of the Associated Press, because it was syndicated, the same text all across the country, but with different headlines. And the headline in the Baltimore Sun referred to 2 women lovers. And I think that says something about Baltimore in 1905. I don't know anything about Baltimore in 1905, but the historian the historian wannabe in me says that's something I need to learn about. Why would that headline be so clear and another headline, another location be more vague?
And then Nancy made a comment here. Harriet is misspelled on the commemorative stone,
Oh
which
goodness, I never noticed that. And I've seen it spelled different ways though. So, but that's interesting. So, full transparency, at the commemorative stone some years ago, there was also a special stake put in the ground with a sort of a medallion on it that says U.S. Life Saving Service Keeper. I may or may not go to the cemetery with some frequency and make sure that it's in the proper place. And somebody else may or may not go to the cemetery with an equal frequency and move it back to the commemorative stone. And I do now know that I'm not the only one that makes that move from the commemorative stone to Harriet Stone.
and then one more question about if are there other relatives around.
That's something I have not been able to find yet. and and this primarily has been more avocation than vocation. Uh, what I was sharing is primarily from an article that I had published in the Parks Stewardship Forum journal in May of 2023. And I haven't done a lot more work since. Um, but it would be really interesting to see what I might find if there are any relatives and if relatives know anything. I've in sort of queer history circles, I've heard really interesting stories of family members coming to a person's home right after they've died, and all of the friends are throwing everything that that person owned out the back so that the family doesn't come in and destroy it. So I don't know. In their wills, um, I don't think Harriet had any relatives listed. Anne had like a niece and, or a nephew, and what remained of their estates that weren't given to each other or to the church, the Episcopal Church in Michigan City, went to those descendants.
Monica, did you have another question when you have your hand raised?
I did. So for people who are interested in these methodologies, and I'm a person who's interested in them. This book, Lesbian Love Story by Amelia Posanza, is an instance. This is a nonfiction book, and the author goes around to archives, and she uses archives in really interesting ways to construct the narrative of relationships where nobody is labeling anything lesbian or gay. And so I found this a really good read.
Oh, good.
And
I will look that one up. And I think you asked about the spelling of Susan's name. It's Ferentinos.
Yes.
I have her book. Is it in this pile here? Oh, it's nearby. But she has a book on interpreting lesbian and gay history. And I can bring up a couple of references here, I think.
So, from my experience, a lot of gays and lesbians are very interested in archiving their lives. And so, sometimes I think that's a very good source. And you can find yourself looking at something like, excuse me, looking at something like a checkbook or a bank account to see, whose name's on it. Yeah, thank you for this.
Can you
I spelled Susan's name wrong, so it's only one N or one R, but I can
One R.
The reference for her book as well.
Got it.
Okay, and this Park Stewardship Forum, it's interesting to look at the entire issue. It was a special issue in May of 2023 that I was privileged to be a guest co-editor of. And it was on LGBTQIA plus experience and expertise in the outdoors and conservation. And there are some really phenomenal articles. Mine was the only one that sort of delved into research in history, but there were some others that were really, really amazing. So thank you for that, Monica, for that reference.
So it's Parks Stewardship Forum.
Park Stewardship Forum. If you go to the URL for this article of mine, on that page, you can see the table of contents of that entire special issue. And it's published by the George Wright Society, which was named for the first chief scientist of the National Park Service, and then a special institute on parks and people at University of California, Berkeley, which a principal in that is John Jarvis, the 17th director of the National Park Service under the Obama administration.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, lots of other thanks on great presentations and things on Facebook, Brian. So lots of admiration and accolades coming your way. And Monica, just to confirm, is the book that Lesbian Love Stories by Amelia Posanza? Is that the author?
Posanza, Possanza.
I dropped it in the chat for everyone, for Nancy.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I got
it. The publisher is Catapult.
Great, wonderful. Great.
So do the national park workers have any kind of way of archiving their lives? Because that could be really interesting.
Yeah, I can tell you a couple things. I've got a colleague at Indiana University who has worked for an organization called Traditional Arts Indiana, sort of a state folklorist, but he has done, his name is John Kay, Jonkay, and he has done uh, sort of ethnographic research with park rangers, some national park rangers, a lot of state park rangers as well.
Mhm.
And so he is a really great resource for ranger stories. And then there's a professional organization called the Association of National Park Rangers. Their website is just anpr.org, I think. And they have been doing an oral history project for a number of years. And that's going to be a broad story. Yeah, thank you, Em. A broad story, not just about LGBTQ rangers. I got to say, I started my career with the National Park Service a long, long time ago. 1977 was my first ranger job, and I worked as a volunteer in 2 parks before that. And then I was at Indiana Dunes from 1979 to 81 as a ranger. I was certain for the longest time that I might be the only gay park ranger in the world. And subsequently, as sort of community has emerged as well, there's a pretty solid network. One thing that has happened under the 47th President of the United States is that the LGBTQ employee resource group of the National Park Service has been eliminated. I'm working with the George Wright Society, and in early October, we are going to be launching a virtual community of people sort of in the place-based conservation professions of LGBTQ folks that will only poorly and partially fill that gap. But we're working on creating a virtual community and an affinity group within this particular, within and then beyond the bounds of this particular professional organization.
Mhm.
I believe this is a good spot to do our wrap up. We're at the 1 hour mark.
Wonderful.
I just want to remind people that July will be our break month, and we'll be back in August, hopefully with a presentation on by somebody with the EPA. It sounds favorable, but not 100% solid yet. And then September, we're hoping that Sacha Guy Burns of the LaPorte County Solid Waste District will do a session with us on recycling. Michigan City has kicked off a huge campaign to really reduce the waste that's going to the landfill in Michigan. So, Em, you may have a couple announcements from Save the Dunes.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do.
I do. We've got a lot of exciting events coming up. June is Save the Dunes anniversary month. So we've got a plethora of good events on the way, including our open house anniversary celebration on Friday, June 20th. That'll be from 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Come in and out as you please. We'll be showing off our new renovations and our new interior design, and of course, sharing lots of information about Save the Dunes history. And then we also are gearing up to promote, and tickets are now on sale, early bird tickets for our Jammin' with Save the Dunes, which is our fall fundraiser that will be returning this year to Millennium Park in Michigan City, right on the water there. And like I said, early bird tickets are on sale, but the VIP ticket includes a boat ride the day of the event on the Amanita, which I think is really great. So those tickets are up on our website right now, and we'd love to see everybody out by the beach for a Save the Dunes event.
And Brian, just thank you so very much. I learned even more this time. I don't know if it was because I was so blown away the first time I wasn't able to absorb all the information, but I do believe you presented additional information today.
And there are a
So
couple of new
just-
articles I found after that last talk.
Yeah, just thank you so very much, and for being, you know, a pioneer in this particular field and also an advocate, especially for all LGBTQAI plus individuals, since this is Pride Month,
You bet.
declared for the month of June.
Can I ask real quick, is that Jen Fisher that I have not seen since high school?
That's Jen
I
Fisher.
don't think so. I mean,
Okay,
I think I graduated high school probably like 94 in Tennessee.
Oh,
so
yeah, I didn't graduate until the 2000s.
Yeah, Jen Fisher is actually one of our newest board members for Save the Dunes.
Oh, wonderful.
And
Oh,
she
I'll turn
brings
my
to-
video on so you can see if I look like the person.
No, no. But I wouldn't be surprised for her to show up, but I haven't seen her since high school.
Yeah, and we love having Jen on the board because she's bringing a scientific expertise to what we're doing. And her specialty is water quality, especially Lake Michigan. And Jen, cheers to you. I
Cheers.
see you have your drink too. And oh my gosh, there's a lot of us. Oh, Charlene
Everyone.
too. There we go. Okay,
Well,
what a
thank
way
you,
to send
everybody.
each other off. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
for
This was
joining us.
excellent. This was really fun to hear about.
It was.
Thank
And
you,
Sarah,
everybody.
Noel, everybody, Warren.